An alpha is not a leader. You can intimidate people into following you, but they won't admire you. Dominance breeds fear. Care earns trust. Jane Goodall.
You're listening to the Coached Podcast, hosted by Coach Keren Eldad, world-class personal and executive coach. It's your show. We answer your questions, and you get coached on any issue that concerns you. Here's Coach Keren.
Hey there, superstars. Welcome to a new episode of the Coached Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Keren, and we're going to go a little bit off format in today's very special edition to tackle a much broader theme than usual. For this, I've brought in two professionals, two superstar experts for a conversation about real leadership, servant leadership. Don't fret. We're going to kick things off by defining what that means, what servant leadership is. So settle in and get ready for a great talk. If this is your first time here, welcome. And no matter how long you've been listening, if you love the podcast, please head over to the Apple Store and give us your 5-star rating and a review. It really makes a big difference. Let's dive right into today's topic. First, I want to issue a brief disclaimer. Even though I've been an executive coach for some years now, and I've had the privilege of coaching some big-time companies like Estee Lauder and Deutsche Bank and LVMH, I don't claim to know everything about leadership. I don't even necessarily claim to know anything about many things. But there is one thing I do know about leadership and the creation of cohesive and positive teams. And it's this: don't be a douche. Many people think of leadership as being important, being in charge, being at the top, being in power, having control, being able to be the one who makes the decisions, or the person with the most influence. Okay, those are not terrible things if they're in the right hands. By the right hands, I mean the hands of the well-intended, the collaborative, the trusting, those who fully believe that people are the heart and soul of organizations, and they are, for the most part, doing the best that they can. They will and should get along with others because they evoke the best from them. But in the wrong hands, these ideas of leadership, they can sometimes spell disaster. In the wrong hands, by wrong hands, what I mean is the hands of those with more Machiavellian notions of power, thinking that power is finite and therefore must be possessed, dominated, or controlled, and kept out of the hands of most people who by default, you assume, are not doing their best and are not to be fully trusted. This kind of notion spells difficult behavior. That's what I mean by douche. And that behavior can lead, as I have seen, to truly bad behavior. To put it lightly, in the words of the eminent organizational psychologist Adam Grant, who has dedicated many podcast interviews to this and many of his books to this, if you think you have to be an asshole to be successful, you might be an asshole. And to add my 2 cents to that, people around you, they don't become awesome and empowered. They become scared, and they generally stop speaking up. Then they grow disengaged, and ultimately they will stop behaving with accountability and break off from your leadership. So it just does not last. In a nutshell, don't be that which Adam Grant cautions against. It is a natural development of competitive tendencies. But again, look at the research. Look at Brené Brown's research. Look at Adam Grant's research. It has a very short lifespan. What has a much longer lifespan is a win-win mentality, not a win-lose mentality. Not a zero-sum game, but an end that sees all parties better off. This is always possible. And it is proven through heaps of research and through today's discussion about servant leadership. So today, I really want to talk about what that comes down to, how to rise up above all the other qualities and give people service and a collaborative spirit. So as promised, I'm going to open with that definition of what servant leadership is, what we're going to talk about today. And here it is. Servant leadership is a leadership philosophy in which the main goal of the leader is to serve. It is different from traditional leadership where the leader's main focus is the thriving of the company. It puts the company, the organization, and the team above the self. If you're interested in being that kind of leader and the best leader you can be, this episode is for you. With that, let's introduce today's panel to talk about what servant leadership means to real leaders, how the thoughts and ideas about these general tendencies have changed their game as leaders, and what they can advise other superstars like you to do in your life to behave this way and attain similar results. I can't think of two better people to tell you about how to change your game. People who can advise other superstar leaders in order to line up not only with ideas, but with new ways of operating in your team and in your life. Please help me welcome our panel guests today. We have Erika Franko, who is the Vice President of Customer Success at Accenture and a seasoned executive and team leader. Larry Perkins, the CEO and founder of SierraConstellation Partners and the best-selling author of a book I absolutely adore, the book that wrote the book on servant leadership and networking, Don't Be a Stranger. Welcome, Erika and Larry. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Karen.
All right, so I want you to tell a little bit about your background, how you started to emerge as a leader, what your game was like in the very beginning, and how you absorbed what leadership was, and what if any, pivot occurred during this trajectory. Erika, I'm going to start with you because I also know that Accenture is an extraordinarily, to this day, hierarchical organization. Go ahead. Why don't you share that with us?
Thanks, Karen. So I really got started on my leadership journey sort of after I emerged as maybe a top player in the organization, both at Accenture and another role that I served in a senior vice president capacity. And, I think the extraordinary thing about that is you can get away with a long time sort of going down the path of being, as Karen would like to say, a superstar. So you're operating at a really high level, you're producing a lot. But I think the challenge is when you start to work with other people, sometimes you are so focused on a goal, you forget that people are involved in the equation. And I think that was one of the biggest learnings or lessons learned from me. To be a great leader, it wasn't just producing, it wasn't about just being excellent at what you were doing, but it's really how you impact the people around you. And I think that was a really profound change to me. And it seems like it should be something so intuitive and so easy because I was really, blessed to work with a lot of great leaders over time. But I think that's the one thing that I had sort of missed as I was being groomed to be a leader, within the various organizations that I've worked with.
And how'd you figure that out? Was it just not working? You were like working all the time, but people didn't like you?
Working all the time, but people didn't like me. I found that I wasn't my authentic self. I tend to be a little bit silly. And I think at work, I was presenting myself as this very rigid, formal person, which is a little bit of my personality, but not the whole thing. And then I think, frankly, I entered into coaching because I knew those things about myself. And, as we like to talk about, you can't do all of these things on your own. So, what I was doing got me so far, but to get to that next level, to get to the top, I think it requires, a little bit of insight into what you might not know about yourself, and where you can make some changes to just be a better servant leader to the people that you're working with.
That's a wonderful point because you're bringing up a really key opener, right? Which is self-awareness, which takes time to develop, starts to help us to free ourselves a little bit more, show up more authentically. And that's the beginning of a different style of leadership that isn't so task-focused. Thank you for that. Larry, how did you come to be a leader? What did you see in the early years and how did you emerge to be the powerful CEO powerhouse that you are today?
Wow, with that build-up. Honestly, kind of two things. I think some bits of leadership are a little bit innate, and you find yourselves in situations that are leadery along the way. And I think I've got some of that, not all of it. And I know there are certainly people that have more of that. But the honest answer is by mistake. I call starting my business a fit of mid-20s existential rage that got me to start something. And the reverse narrative is so much cleaner than what it was at the time. It seemed so well thought out and strategic and all that kind of stuff. But in retrospect, it was just, I don't want to do this anymore. I think I can do it better, and damn them all. I don't think I have to work for them anymore. Right. So in this kind of fit of rage, and maybe there was something subconsciously that was pushing me along, but let's pretend that it wasn't. You do what Erika was just saying. You're working and working and working and head down and all that kind of stuff. And then at a certain point, you wake up and kind of say, "This sucks." I don't want to look at that. I don't have a lot of kind of natural role models. I've adopted some along the way. And Karen, you probably go to town on this, but a lot of them are negative role models. Like, I don't want to be that. That doesn't look like something I want to do, and I do want to look more like that. And what does that look like? They're unhealthy. They have unhealthy relationships. They're don't seem very happy. And then you kind of reflect on those things and say, okay, how do I not do that, or how do I do what is a little bit more inspirational? And then you're working. You say, well, I don't want to be working like this when I'm older. And I remember in retrospect, one of the things I remember was I was at a closing for a particular transaction years and years ago. And it was like, and this was in the early stages of my business. It was like 3:00 in the morning or some stupid time. And I'm the type that wakes up at 3:00, doesn't go to bed at 3:00. And I was dizzy with fatigue and all that kind of stuff. And I see that there are, two senior partners of law firms next to me. I'm like, my God, that just sounds like a terrible thing to do. I don't want to do that. So, and I can't say again, it was that conscious, but it stuck with me. I'm talking about it now. So I was like, how do I not do that? How do I do something to not do that? And then what it really came down to, and it ties into the whole servant leadership idea, is I need people to get to where I want to get to. It's not all on my back. And I definitely have some Atlas-y qualities to me, but it's not a sustainable strategy. You need people, and you need to lift people up to be able to get to where you want to get to, at least in my case. So I guess that's how I would answer it.
Oh, that's so epic, because I hear at least a couple of really excellent motifs. The first is questioning who you really are and what you're truly desiring for real autonomy in life. So many of us are making these decisions by default, just like you said, Larry. It's so true. We're observing things around us. And at first, at least, like Erika, many of us just take it at face value and are like, well, I guess that's what I got to do to be here. That certainly was my case. Before I became an executive coach, had my giant epiphany in life. I was a C-suite executive at a big luxury brand, and I wore a lot of gray dresses and behaved a certain way without really presenting in a very quiet, very monotonous tone. Many little things like that were just about lining up, until I started looking around me and looking at my boss's life and looking at my boss's life and thinking, the hell am I doing that for? Who wants to be that? And no one's going to listen to me anyway. Everybody's going to be scared of me. And that's not particularly useful. And the second thing I think that you're talking about is then starting to truly navigate it in a way that lines up with where you want to go. And for that, recognizing that really more people at the helm believing in what you believe in, working towards a common goal, is always going to be way stronger than just one person rowing the boat super hard. So people is where it's at, huh? Can I ask you, Larry, do you believe that you're a servant leader today? And if you do, why should anyone become one?
Yeah, I think it's more of a lifestyle than a diet. So I think I'm on track to do it. I think aspirationally, there's a lot I can be better at, and I definitely have those kind of Machiavellian moments that kind of spring in, which I see as like antithetical to certainly the servant leadership. But as a rule, I strive for it, and I think I'm more often than not, I probably do it. And again, while it certainly is, I think, a better working environment, it is also self-serving, right? I mean, it is something that it's good for the goose and good for the gander. And I think those type of win-win relationships is certainly what I'm trying to do. And in my weaker moments, I stray. But as a rule, I think I'm really trying to be better, with a lot to learn along the way.
What a beautiful way of saying it. It's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. And you're right. I mean, there are moments, all of us, we're human, right? We're bottom line oriented naturally, right? And sometimes it's going to be a little bit of a extra focus on self. But overall, if you really do start recognizing what Larry said, which is what's good for the goose is good for the gander, it is a win-win for all. You start moving in a different way. Thank you for that. Erika, do you think that you've become a servant leader now? Do you think everybody should aspire to behave that way?
Yeah, I see it as my life's work now. I think, if I were asked a few years ago what I wanted to, maybe actually a few weeks ago, what I wanted to do, I would probably have thought about a career, right? Like I want to be a CEO like Larry, or I want to, do this type of work. But now I think that serving other people in a leadership capacity is my life's work, and that's really what I want to do. So I guess in that sense, no, I'm not there, and I don't know that I'll ever be there. I think in line with what Larry was saying, you continue to grow and evolve as you step into kind of leadership positions that are constantly larger or different. And so I think being able to keep that self-awareness of what you want to be, but then also adapt to situations, I think it'll be a constant sort of growing and learning experience.
Well, what do you think's been your biggest learning? What's the biggest transition, would you say, or leap that you made to get here, Erika?
Yeah, I think really two things. I think there's a sense of vulnerability that I don't think that I was willing to show at any point earlier in my career. And I'm just getting into that now. It's not something that I'm like particularly great at, but I'm trying. And I think vulnerability, in one, the sense that, I think we're taught from a very young age to like strive for perfection, but then also not to be perfect because you can't be perfect. So that you kind of have this constant cognitive dissonance in that case of, I want to be these two things, but I know one is never going to be attainable, but I'm going to try anyway. So I think it's this letting go of perfection and knowing that wherever you are and whatever imperfect state you're in, you can still lead people, you can still inspire people. And I think that was a big takeaway for me, and something that's really helped kind of along the journey. And then I think being in service of others instead of just the end goal, I think that's going to be something that's progressive for me and really for anyone, right? Because as you said, Keren, we're bottom line oriented. I'm in a career and a job today where, we have deliverables and we have end goals. So we're constantly kind of getting to the end of a project or the end of a deliverable. But at the same time, making sure that along the way that we're remembering that people are working on these things. We're not machines, we're not widgets, cogs in a wheel, and that, learning and growth for everyone on the team is really important, just as it is to, fulfill contractual obligations.
That's true. And what you're talking about here, of course, is the development of empathy. Empathy towards others was really does depend on your own vulnerability, your own ability to be nice to yourself, forgiving to yourself, allowing yourself to be a little bit more of a free roaming freak. Larry, would you like to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and it's a tricky question. I mean, I love the free roaming freak. I'm going to adapt that, but I think what you're kind of asking is was there like a particular moment? Is that kind of where you're going with it?
Yeah. Was there a moment where you were like, whatever I'm doing is not effective, I got to try something else?
Yeah, I mean, lots of moments. I think at the end of it, you really feel it more than anything else. Like you just don't have the same level of excitement. I mean, I think by and large, I'm guessing all three of us on the phone are kind of superstars, right, in their own right. And superstars usually have a high degree of energy. And when you feel that energy flagging for whatever reason, or you don't feel like you've got your mojo in the way that you expect it or want it or visualize it for yourself kind of in earlier days, I think those are the little moments. I can't say it's one like kind of cataclysmic event that says, holy cow, you got to go do this thing right now. It's more a series of feelings where like it just, whether you feel a little bit down in the dumps or you just, you're not quite at your energy level that you want to be at. And I think it's those moments that, at least for me, they're hard to observe sometimes. Like you have to tune in a little bit more. And I think that self-awareness bit is so critically important. And again, something else I'm continuing to strive for, because I think self-awareness as a rule is pretty tricky, especially in leadership positions, because there's a lot of sycophants, there's a lot of obsequious people. So you hear all the attaboys or attagirls and, hey, you're doing great. And then there could be this, again, I'll use the cognitive dissonance. It's like, well, why don't I feel great? If everyone says I'm doing so great, like what's the difference there? And that's super weird, because you can, if you're externally motivated, which sometimes I am, you say, well, I should feel great. Like, why am I not feeling great? And then it's confusing and all those things. But that's a very long-winded and circular answer to your question, Keren.
As usual, I thought every word was precious and brilliant, and I'll tell you why. And actually, as a coach, I'm kind of conditioned to not be approving when it is not particularly useful to you. But to everybody else out there thinking, why don't I feel that good inside? Most of the time, it's because there is some dissonance occurring within you. It's not about the external. It's about something kind of a compromise that's happening. We can talk about the fine tuning of that nuance, but really the most important thing is to work with that emotion, not against that emotion, not repress it, not fulfill it externally, but really listen to it and ask yourself, where should I charge my batteries? Where's happiness really coming from? What have I short circuited a little bit? For me, sometimes it's because I'm legit tired. I've worked too much, which, by the way, is a dissonance because I shouldn't be working too much. If I really deserve happiness and freedom and ease, definitely shooting myself in the foot there. But in many other times, it's really because our focus has been drained by lots of other conditions and we've become conditional thinkers, which makes us conditional leaders. How we are, how we feel, it's how we lead. And I think that self-awareness, yeah, you're right. The best thing you can do is start checking it against other people. They're going to be a little clearer with the way they see you if they have the tools to help you and they really are on the up and up, right? They're not just buzzkills looking to trip you up. but you also can just do the work internally through meditation and mindfulness and all the other tactics that we teach you in coaching and in several other forums like this. I'm wondering if you have qualities today that you can name that really are on your servant leadership checklist, how you approach your team with very basic characteristics. Erika, do you have any servant leadership checklist
Yeah,
values?
I think I've tried to become more of a teacher than just, a leader. And I say just a leader, but don't exactly mean it that way. But, teaching people what I know, what I don't know. And I think teaching someone that I don't know everything is probably the more important part of this. And that it's okay to not know everything. And then it's okay that there's not one clear path ahead and not any path is perfect or 100% correct. I hope that when someone moves on, and here we're kind of project-based work, of course, but when someone moves on from me, I want them to say, not that I liked her, but like I learned from her, I felt good working with her, and I can leave feeling inspired. Then to me, I've done my job. And so that's the quality I'm trying to foster most right now, because I have a tendency to have the blinders on and drive straight forward, as Keren is a driver in that way. But trying to look at everyone as I move forward and make sure that they have they receive that kind of teaching as well as give it back to me.
So you're talking about teaching and humility and inspiring. These are wonderful, wonderful words. They're definitely associated with servant leadership. Larry, are there any words that come to mind, values that come to mind when you think of servant leadership?
Yeah. Gosh, there's so many. And I thought Erika's response was good. And I'm not sure if this is even germane to your question, but one of the things I've noticed is that words really matter. And when I say that, you have to be mindful of your role coming in as a CEO. You say you don't like the coffee, and the next day there's new coffee there, and that's a weird thing to think about. So you have to think about your leadership role frequently and what you're doing, because people are naturally going to want to respond to someone in certain roles, and that's maybe not on the path of what you really need to do. So I feel like having that ability to be mindful of your words and intentional with your words, because it can screw you up sometimes if you just spout off. And that's a big part of it. But then the other side, and again, circuitous here, I've been told I think in webs, which I think is accurate because I'm all over the place. But then trying to use those words kind of in a constructive way. I mean, this notion of candor is something that I'm really, really working on right now, which is I'm defining right now kind of non-judgmental feedback, just being able to have a conversation with those same words and not kind of kill the person when you're having it, especially if it's something kind of yucky to talk about, but have those conversations and use the right combination of words to kind of get the point across, but also not come that, you're at risk or you're fearful. And you're I'm always trying, you're kind of starting with this coming from a place of love, or this is coming from a place of non-judgment, but this is something we can get better at. Right. And I think that's something I'm working on a lot right now. And then, Erika talked about it well. I mean, this notion of vulnerability is so critical. I mean, it's so much in the zeitgeist right now that it's almost not even worth talking about. But I think that that's so hard, right? Because there's also this, because it's so popular to talk about vulnerability right now, there's kind of this faux vulnerability. So you have to be authentically vulnerable, which is trickier. There's kind of this notion of failure porn right now. There's podcasts about failure. I get that. But there's it's not talking about, I failed on this business venture. Now I'm the captain of industry. No, it's this idea of this sucks. I don't like talking about this. This is uncomfortable. And using that appropriately, I guess, is something that I continue to work on.
You touched on vulnerability and clarity and praise, I think, as well. And Erika's response reminds me of a new book that I'm reading right now called Think Again by Adam Grant, which is all about the power of curiosity and not knowing what you know. Fun fact, I believe he copied it from You Don't Know What You Don't Know, homies, yours truly's TEDx talk. I'm joking, of course, but it is really something that you want to cure if you really want to lead. Humility is going to get you much farther. And Larry's response, it reminds me of Brene Brown's Dare to Lead, which, as I'm sure anyone who's read it will agree. It's just a wonderful book. And in it, that was that breakthrough point for me, at least, which was clarity is kind. It's vulnerability is not about telling you, hey, just so you know, I'm having a bad day and I've gained 5 pounds and I just failed too. That's what failure porn is. That's oversharing. It usually comes from lack. It doesn't feel good because it is over. However, not sugarcoating, having the guts to show up for a conversation that matters and that you know in your heart is most likely to help the other side in spite of the discomfort, that's real vulnerability. That's the ability to show up and transcend. And I think that no one demonstrates this better than you, Larry. I want to talk for a second about your book. Your book, Don't Be a Stranger, which of course I've read a couple of times and given thousands out of. Maybe tens, but still, I've given out a lot of them because I just love it. And I also really specifically appreciate the shout out and immortalization of my cat, Waffles, who gets a special mention in the book. It's about networking, but it's also about servant leadership. In fact, the spirit of servant leadership is really what informs your particular branch of networking, which is the way you've created your own luck. Can you speak about that a little bit so everyone can share your ethos? And
Sure.
by the way, the book is going to be in today's show notes.
Oh, thank you. So, I mean, listen, Karen, I learned a lot of this from you. I mean, you used this idea before that stuck with me is like, you don't want to be kind of grabby. You don't want to be like, and you use it in a different context, but you don't want to be like, kind of gimme, right? And I feel like so many people approach, whether it's relationship building or networking, all these kind of dirty words around that with this transactional mindset. And I think that at the end of it, these are human beings, right? And I mean, I think Erika talked about that really well a second ago. I think, ultimately we're all in this together. We're trying to do the same things. Everyone's trying to do their best for the most part. And I think if you go in with this mindset that I'm here to help, like, okay, it's a business relationship. But of course, I know that you want business. I want business. I'm not saying you're my best friend, but there's this idea of just generally trying to be helpful and support people in the world. And, it pays back, paying it forward, paying it back, whatever you want to call it. Like, just generally being helpful to people has reaped untold kind of rewards so far and into the future for me. And it seems so obvious if you think about it. Like, how do you like to be treated? Like, I mean, golden rule and whatnot. I've got a 7-year-old. We talk about golden rule a lot. It's really not that tricky, but people seem to somehow forget that after graduating college and getting into the workforce. So in so many ways, I mean, what the book is about is ultimately being intentional about your relationships and being mindful of going into a business context or a business networking context that you're ultimately trying to help. They're trying to help you. You're doing it for a reason, and just to manage it like you would any asset, because at the end of the day, that's what you got is your relationships, your reputation, and how you feel about the relationships you have.
Oh, that's exactly right. Erika, is this resonating with you?
It is. And I read the book and I loved it. And I think in particular, as someone who's a very nervous networker, I'll just say it that way. I think there's been so much talk around, make sure that you're going in with something to give. And I think that that's where like some of the paralyzation comes from. Like, well, what do I have? Like, how do I, interact with someone if I don't have an immediate, like, I can, set up a website for you or something like that. So, I think it's almost calming in a way to know that, like, if you go in with that intention, then that is, and I know intention is sort of like failure. We throw it around a lot, but I do think it matters. And I think it kind of starts to shape conversation. So I think all of that resonated really well with me and highly recommend it if you're also a nervous networker like I am.
I think everybody should read this book. I think it's phenomenal and really funny and it's easy to read. And I just want to say that this harkens back to one of my favorite passages that changed my game as a human, not just as a leader. And it's by Wayne Dyer. The next time you're in a room and you're wondering what's in this for me, or I'm really scared to be here, or why am I here? Ask instead, how may I serve? If you shift your focus to how may I serve, everything will change. I've now coached, more than 500 executives privately, and I've found a lot of imposter syndrome at the top, a lot of fear of not being up to the job in spite of all the success. And really, if you stop focusing on how have I earned this? Do I deserve to be here? Why me? And really start asking, how can I make myself really useful here? It's going to change your game. But I want to ask you just maybe two more questions that I really, really want to ask if you have the time. The first is, Erika, what would you tell Erika 10, 15 years ago about leadership?
Oh, I think I would probably say, remember it's about people, not an outcome. And that it's okay not to be great at it in the beginning. And I think that was probably one of the biggest things, that the change for me. Like, I wanted to be perfect at it at the very beginning. I wanted to read all the books and do everything that the book said. And I had to be, 100% great, and everyone had to love me. And then I think I ran into a situation, which Keren, where I found out that a lot of people really didn't love me, and frankly didn't want to work with me. And I think, it shook me a little bit, because it's that kind of, you've been climbing, as Larry mentioned earlier, you're climbing, everything's going really well, and then all of a sudden you look around and you're like, wait a second, I'm not really liked, or I'm not really respected in a leadership capacity, even though my work might be. So, I think those are the things that I would probably, don't focus so much on outcomes, and really think about people, think about what you're serving instead of what you're doing all the time. I still fall into that trap. I'm trying to kind of move on from it. But I think, those are things that I would probably say to myself 10 years ago. And also, I think I got into this trap too of being asked constantly, like, what do you want to do in 5 years? Where are you going to be? Who are you going to be in 5 years? And I think everyone wants to hear CEO, everyone wants to hear senior vice president, or any of those words, right? And I think if I had focused maybe more on like who I wanted to be and how I wanted to serve the people around me and the world in general, I think I probably would have served myself a little bit better in the process.
Amen. Purpose is not a title. This is a journey. Every word you're saying is really received with love. And I also want to applaud your honesty for being open and sharing that with other people who may have had the same experience. That's a really big deal. And to start to learn that you can learn from criticism like that rather than say, okay, I guess I should quit now and go crawl in a hole. That's a really, really important observation. Thanks so much for saying that. I know that the leader that you are today, if your 15 years ago self were here, she'd high five you. Larry, what do you think about this? What would you say to Larry 15 years ago?
Yeah, so much. It's remarkable. Yeah, I'm trying to distill it down into words. I mean, there's kind of the good guys and the bad guys. I mean, I guess in the category of kind of probably the more important stuff is, and one of my colleagues actually said this is, you do you, right? Like you, and I mean, I don't know if other people say that or not, but I kind of took it for granted along the way. But the way I interpret that is, like, we're all our unique snowflakes, right? But there are certain things that, like, I'm super good at, and Keren, you're super good at, and Erika, you're super good at, right? Like, I spent so much time dealing with shame and all these other things about all the things I was bad at that, I kind of neglected the things that I was good at, right? So there's lots of ways to kind of go through life, but I think that harnessing or leaning into your superpowers are the things that I should be focusing on. And I think my 15-year-old self certainly would be saying, well, you got to get better at this, and you got to read this book, and you got to look like that, and you got to do these things. And I wish I could go back in time and just say, like, just don't care about that. Like, just you focus on the stuff that you want to do, and that will work out or it won't, but everything kind of works out in the end. And I have this mentor in my life, and actually I've fallen out of touch. His nickname was El Guapo, and his nickname for me was Young Guapo. And he, I remember we were coming back after, probably a few too many drinks and driving in Wichita, Kansas. And he said, Young Guapo, you're going to be just fine. Because I was sweating about something stupid. I screwed up an analysis. I did something, inane. It doesn't really matter. Like, I don't even remember what it was at this point, but I thought it was going to be the end of the world. And at the end of it, he says, no matter what happens, like, you're fine. Like, you're okay. And I wish and that was about 15 years ago. I wish I actually listened to him a little bit more, because it was like probably the most sage advice I got.
This is the most sage advice, because first, I'm so touched by that story, and also the ability to open up and say we're so keen on beating ourselves up, on heeding to the call of shame and focusing on what we've done wrong versus the immense counterbalance of what we're doing very, very well. that we should start having the authenticity and ability to audacity actually to rock our lives. But you're also reminding me a lot of what Oprah would have said to her younger self, which I've heard her say on plenty of occasions, which is, you're going to be okay. It's
Mhm.
okay. One of the hallmarks of leaderships and the hallmarks of being a vulnerable leader and an empathetic leader is allowing yourself to be wrong and yourself to make mistakes. I am wrong often. There are many things I do not know. I have made mistakes. Just last week, I woke up at 7:20 and totally missed a 7 a.m. coaching session. Now, old Keren would have believed that I deserved to die for such a cardinal sin. But today, I'm a little easier on myself. I can say, listen, I'm sorry. I didn't wake up on time. Can I make it up to you? And let's figure it out. And we're all learning through this. Nobody is perfect. So that is, I think, the most wonderful way of defining that and talking to our former selves in a way that really breeds a new form of leadership, which brings me to my last question, which is, are you optimistic about the state of leadership today or what you see emerging in leadership? I know you're both in big networks like YPO, and you actually do see people around you who are at different stages of their career. Erika, are you feeling optimistic?
I'm feeling optimistic, I think, in the sense that there are more people than ever who want to step into leadership roles, and I think that's a great thing. The thing that challenges me a little bit is I think that there are so many theories out there on how to be a leader that, in particular, where I was 15 years ago and some of the people that I work with today, they're reading all of the books and they're like, well, which way is the right way? So it's kind of like, diet culture. Now we're in like leadership culture. There are 50 different flavors of how to be a leader, when the reality is some of this you have to work out on your own. Like, who am I in this role? I'm not going to look exactly like Larry would in a leadership situation. We wouldn't necessarily handle every situation the same way. And that's great. Like, that is something that we should, really foster, that we have different perspectives. So I would just, I would say that I'm optimistic that more people want to be leaders. I really wish, though, that everyone would take the time to figure out what that means to them.
Yeah.
And what resonates with them, rather than like trying to grab all of these theories, which I've done. So I can say that. So which I've done. And kind of distill that down. I think lots of great literature out there, but at some point you have to connect it back to what it means to you and how it makes your life move forward.
Back to Larry's point, you do you. Absolutely. Larry, are you optimistic about the state of leadership as it's emerging?
Gosh, so I think it's kind of like barbell. Like, I think I'm very optimistic in some ways because I think there's, to Erika's point, there's more resources available. I think there's some people that are very keen to do it. I think there's a lot of conversation around vulnerability and truly like innate, like not innate, but like really important leadership stuff that people have never really talked about. And I think that's very, very powerful. So I think that's the barbell. And I guess it would be like an off balance barbell, because I think that's a smaller bit, but I'm very, very optimistic on that. I'm not so much. I think there's a lot of kind of groupthink and not lack of intention and just kind of mindlessness going on. I'm super anti-social media. I think that there's a lot of bad stuff that's just out there in the world that is toxic. Now, the good news, I'm a consummate optimist, right? So I think I'm not going to do weird algebra equations here, but I think like kind of the coefficient of power on the small barbell is probably more powerful than the drag on everything like that. But it's I don't like the distribution. I wish it was a little bit more even, because I think the leaders that will come out of this are going to be some of the most impactful leaders probably in history, right? But I think that there's a massive flock of people that need to be led, or the kind of these pseudo leaders that in some ways are kind of dangerous. Like, I think that it's thoughtless. I think it's kind of mind control-y, Orwellian. There's like a lot of gross stuff in there that is dragging me down a little bit. But back to what I would have said to myself, we'll be fine. We'll make it through, but it's just going to look a little bit different at the end of it than how I'd like it to go.
It's still here. It's still alive and kicking, Larry. And I like you and like Erika, I'm certainly on the optimism scale as assessed. But you still meet teams that are operating in strange, almost Orwellian ways, for sure. And that's because the patterns have been there for a very long time. But in this sense, I always think about Martin Luther King or Gloria Steinem or other thinkers who have been around for a very, very long time and are aware of the fact that real change, real transformation takes a very long time. So hopefully, with years and years of more consciousness, of broader awareness around this, we will reach a different modus operandi for leadership. I want you to know that listening to you today makes my heart sing, because if you are the future of leadership, then we are all going to be okay. Thank you so much for today's conversation. That was absolutely wonderful. I hope everybody out there has enjoyed it enormously. For me, one of the biggest takeaways was that leadership is about clarity and connection and service beyond yourself. So if there's one thing I want you to emerge with from this talk, it's if serving is beneath you, then leadership is also beneath you. I hope that everyone can rise to the challenge of empathy, vulnerability, kindness, and collaboration, because you know what? They just pay off more. That's today's episode, everybody. If you love today's episode, please head over to the App Store, give us a 5-star review and rating. It makes an enormous difference. If my guests are so kind to share any way that they can be followed and or you can read their book, I will 100% include that in today's show notes, including Larry's bestseller, Don't Be a Stranger. Thank you so much, Erika and Larry, for joining us today, and I will see you all next time.
All right. Thanks, Karen. Thanks,
Thanks,
Erika.
Karen.
Thank you for joining Coach Keren. Would you like to have your questions answered on a future episode? Visit KerenEldad.com, Keren Eldad.com, and tell us about your challenge or issue. Until next time, live with enthusiasm.